Nicole Lewis, and I'm the founder and CEO of Generation Hope. Before we begin, and to allow our other colleagues some time to join us, want to thank you for joining us and for your interest in supporting student parents who are working to earn their post-secondary credential. It's always exciting for us to be in community with other people who are interested in this work and who are dedicated to advancing it. So we appreciate you making time today to dive a little bit deeper. Again, we want to give folks some time to log on and join us. And we also want to get to know you a little bit, who's on the line with us or who's in the Zoom room with us. So as we wait for folks to join, we'd love for you to drop your name, your institution, and the book you're reading right now or the TV show that you're addicted to right now in the chat, so we get a sense of who's here today. And then hopefully we'll also get some good book and TV show recommendations in the process. So we'll give you some time to do that. Again, your name, your institution, and your favorite book or TV show that you just can't put it down, you can't turn away. We want to see what you all are reading and checking out right now. I can tell you, I have a 5-month-old who is teething, as in addition to 4 other children. So I'm reading absolutely nothing right now because I just am happy I'm here, that I am awake and I'm able to do this with you all. But I have been watching Made on Netflix. That's something that whenever I get a moment of me time, I have been watching that series on Netflix. So and it's been great so far. So Brooke is joining from the Women's Gender Equity Center at CSULB, and Killing Eve. Wow, that sounds intense. On BBC and Hulu. That sounds like a great recommendation. Holly is joining us from University of Tennessee. She just finished reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. That also sounds very interesting. And rewatching New Girl. I've never watched that, but I know people who love it. So I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Yes, so you understand what I am talking about when I say very little me time and very little sleep these days. So kudos to you for actually finishing reading a book. Awesome, great. Anybody else want to add in as we just give our friends some time to log on? Reggie, I saw you clapping for New Girl, so you must be a fan. And then Reginald dropped in the chat Squid Game. That's definitely huge right now on Netflix. So I think everybody's been talking about Squid Game. So awesome. So I think we got some good recommendations in the process. I'm excited about who all is joining us today. So thank you so much for your responses. We'll go ahead and get started. During today's webinar, we're going to discuss the experiences of parenting college students, including the assets they bring to their campus community, as well as the challenges that they face when it comes to completing college. We're also going to share our recommendations for how higher ed institutions can address those challenges. And our recommendations are going to come from a report that we actually just released yesterday called Higher Education and Student Parent Supports: The Barriers, Challenges, and Opportunities, as well as 2 other resources that we released last year. And we're going to make sure to drop the links to those resources in the chat for you, and we'll also send them in a follow-up email after today's webinar. So we're so excited about these reports serving as resources for you as you enhance and grow your student parent work. A few housekeeping items before we dive in. One, we're going to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to pull questions at the end of the session. So please feel free to type in your questions throughout the session. If you have a more urgent question, you can also use the raise your hand feature, also located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to get to that. Also, this session is being recorded and it's going to be posted on our webpage next week. So if you miss anything or if you'd like to share the recording with someone, you'll be able to access it via our website. We're going to go ahead and drop the webpage where you'll be able to find this webinar in the chat now, just so you have it. Lastly, sustainable student parent supports are only possible if there's a strong team leading the effort. And to that end, I'd like to introduce you all to a few members of our awesome team here at Generation Hope, who you're going to hear from over the course of this session. Reginald M. Grant, who is a fan of Squid Game right now, is our Chief Operating Officer, and Portia Polk is our Director of Learning and Advocacy, and I'm honored to be joined by them today. I'd also like to thank Caroline Cassis, who is our Learning and Advocacy Coordinator. She'll be serving as our tech wizard today, and so we are so appreciative of Caroline helping us in that way. If you have any issues, you may chat her directly or email her, and we'll go ahead and drop her email address in the chat as well, so you have that. And now I'm going to pass it over to Reginald to briefly share more about Generation Hope's mission.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks so much. Welcome, everyone. Many of you may be familiar with our organization, but for newcomers, our mission is to ensure all student parents have the opportunities to succeed and experience economic mobility. And we do that by engaging education and policy partners to drive systemic change, and by providing direct support to teen parents in college, as well as their children, through holistic two-generation programming. Our purpose and the way we operate are linked to the life of our founder, Nicole, who is a teen parent in college and truly understands the impact that education and holistic support can have on a young parent's life. We began more than 10 years ago as a direct service organization. And this slide is a quick visual of our direct service work. We believe that our intentional programming and our two-gen approach, providing both teen parents and their children, leads to educational success, their economic mobility, and stronger, thriving families. To give you a sense of who we serve and how we infuse the ideals of our mission into our work, you can see here on the slide. We work with up to 100 teen parents annually, and we'll be growing that number over the next 3 years. In fact, we're serving 125 teen parents now. Our application is open for student parents in the DC area, so we'll make sure that we provide you with that information as well. We serve about 30 of their kiddos and their children of those teen parents annually through our Next Generation Academy, which we launched 3 years ago to become a fully two-gen model. The key components of the holistic wraparound supports of our scholars and their kiddos include free tutoring, mental health supports, tuition assistance, parenting groups, access to high quality childcare, and more. And we're going to drop a link right here in the chat so that you'll get a chance to read a little bit more about our scholar program for those of you who are not familiar. But just a little bit more about who our scholars are. We primarily serve students of color. 43% identify as Hispanic or Latinx, 34% are African American, and 10% identify as multiracial. The majority of our students have an EFC, and that's an expected family contribution of 0. And nearly 3/4 are first-gen college students. And we are helping them navigate a myriad of challenges, including housing and food insecurity, as well as domestic violence, mental health, and so much more. And underlying everything that we do is a student-centered approach, which means we are not just helping our scholars navigate college, but also life. In many ways, the experiences of our scholars mirror the national student parents demographic. For the nearly 5 million student parents who are parenting, 5 million students who are parenting, their median debt is significantly higher than of their peers without dependents. They also have their student parents are also more likely to intersect with other underrepresented groups along lines of race, socioeconomic status, and other identities and experiences. And perhaps my favorite stat, despite these challenges, the student parents consistently have higher GPAs than their non-parenting peers. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Portia, to share more information about our national impact work, as well as the findings and recommendations from our latest report. Portia?
Thanks, Reggie. In addition to Generation Hope's direct services, we've recently embarked on national work to address the systemic challenges that student parents face. There are three major prongs to that work. The first is our technical assistance program, which is designed to help colleges and universities better serve student parents. This program is called Family U, and we'll be diving a little bit more into that later. The second prong is a federal and local policy and advocacy agenda that is driven by student parents and advocates for policies that accelerate their success. And the last prong of this work is our research and reports and general advocacy to illuminate the student parent experience. So today I'm going to touch a little on the first and third prongs of that national impact work. As Reggie mentioned, a core value of Generation Hope has been and always will be our deference to student parents as experts. Each of our programs have been developed from the lived experience and expertise of our student parents. And the creation of Family U, our new technical assistance and capacity building program, is no different. The Family U cohort model is a comprehensive, customized, evidence-based 2-year capacity building experience. So it's got a lot in it, and it's designed to build and refine institutional capacities and competencies to improve student parent success. In partnership with institutional staff and student parents, colleges, and universities, we've continued to participate in peer learning convenings and campus-based focused independent coaching sessions in the areas of data, policy, culture, and people. And we're really happy to be joined by 4 institutions for this pilot cohort. Those institutions are George Mason University, Trinity Washington University, Northern Virginia Community College, and Montgomery College. And you'll hear and see in our report that they are featured throughout for some of the wonderful things that they are doing to support student parents. At the outset of creating this model for technical assistance, we held a series of focus groups from March 2020 to September 2020 and convened a group of practitioners to serve on a task force to guide the development of Family U. Both groups were tasked with evaluating the efficacy of the model and determining its economic and social viability based on their lived experiences and expertise. But we also really wanted to understand what student parents truly desired from a program that was designed to support them in achieving their dreams. We encouraged our parent participants to think about what would have made their college experience easier. And we asked our college administrators to think about what they would need from a program like Family U by thinking about what was missing on their own campuses to fully support student parents in achieving their dreams. Their expertise and that of practitioners and philanthropy were used to create some of the core elements of Family U, those 4 components that I mentioned earlier. However, we also gathered a lot of rich information from those conversations that extended beyond the immediate needs of Family U and made it into a viable resource for higher ed institutions looking to shift their supports for student parents. We used that information to develop our recent report, Higher Ed and Student Parent Supports, Barriers, Opportunities, and Challenges. This report reflects data from the more than 70 focus group attendees representing numerous 2- and 4-year institutions, nonprofits, and philanthropic organizations across the country. We want to highlight some of those major findings of the report today. And hopefully when you take a look at the report, you'll see all of the other rich information in it. We asked our attendees what barriers did they see when institutions were trying to implement supports for student parents. And we were able to narrow it down to 3 from the perspective of practitioners and 3 from the perspective of student parents. But in general, all members of our focus group spoke to a lack of student parent data and tracking systems as the primary barrier. Members of each focus group cited not collecting data or identifying student parents as the most central challenge when it comes to providing or increasing student parent supports, which comes as no surprise, especially if you have been working in the student parent field as long as we have. Without knowing how many student parents are on campus, higher ed practitioners and leaders are unable to prioritize resources and funding for this deserving population. We're beginning to see action at the state level that addresses the issue of student parent data collection by mandating questions about parenting status on college campuses in states like Oregon and Illinois. However, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in that space in order to make data tracking and data collection a more consistent process and action for student parents for to fundamentally shift how we support student parents. As I mentioned before, we asked practitioners what they saw as barriers and student parents what they saw as barriers. Practitioners pointed to a lack of financial resources and staff capacity, a lack of student parent policies to guide on-campus support and interactions with student parents, and of course, a lack of campus-wide, and as I mentioned before, a lack of data collection, but under that campus-wide policy piece, inconsistencies around how policies are interpreted for the benefit of student parents. For student parents, they cited a lack of information on campus resources, a lack of affordable and flexible childcare solutions, and in general, an unwelcoming campus culture. And I really want to point out the inconsistencies between those two groups. Student parents have a very different experience navigating their supports on campus than practitioners do in administering it. And what we want to do is create some alignment and find joint solutions that create better supports for both groups overall. In the report, we also share ongoing recommendations for institutions as they commit to enhancing their work with student parents. And you can see some of those here. Engaging in opportunities to shift campus culture through programs like Family U and other student parent support programs. Pursuing funding like the Child Care Access Means Parents in School program and the more recent higher education emergency relief funding that serves to support student parents and funnels investments into the student parent population. Shifting the current campus culture to one of belonging for student parents to create community and help move them towards degree completion. Offering a more flexible academic structure to support their busy schedules. And last, but perhaps most importantly, recognizing that student parent work is racial justice work, and that there's an inextricable link between addressing the needs of student parents and doing authentic and actionable diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Now, we recognize that every institution is different, and we don't consider all of these things to be a one-size-fits-all approach to serving student parents. But we really want to emphasize that this work requires more than just a program or more than just a child care center. It requires listening to and understanding the needs of student parents and really applying an institution-wide lens that considers their needs in the implementations of services that support them. Now I'm going to pass it to Nicole to share other resources for higher ed.
Thank you so much, Portia, for providing highlights of our exciting report, and saw that we have folks who are already bookmarking the link to our reports, which is so exciting. You know, this is why we are releasing this information out into the world, is for it to become useful for you all as you look to provide or enhance supports for student parents at your institution. So really exciting to see that. I also we wanted to touch on some of the other reports that we've released and some real tangible resources that you all can also use. We want to make you aware of these resources and also ensure that you are able to use them. So in addition to this report, we've also outlined recommendations in our previous reports that can serve as concrete resources for higher education leaders and practitioners alike. We released a national report back in May 2020. That was our first resource to really kickstart our national impact work and make recommendations for higher ed around better supports for student parents. And it highlights some of the perennial challenges faced by this student group. In other words, we wanted to understand how student parents felt about their higher education experience. So what supports were helpful to them and what gaps in support were most challenging. We found, for example, that 40% of student parents felt disconnected from their campus communities. And that's really important for higher ed leaders to know when they're thinking about how do we engage all students? How do we make sure that all students are successful and are making it to completion, not only within COVID, but in the long term. So, and I do want to stress that we gathered this data even before COVID-19. So as we're thinking about the pandemic and its impacts on student parents, knowing that even before the pandemic, 40% of student parents felt disconnected, we have to think about what, given what's happened over the past year and a half, what that statistic might look like now. There are also some specific evergreen recommendations that we made for institutions, and those recommendations include but they're not limited to a reinforcement of the need for better student-parent data collection methods within institutions. So this really augments what we heard loud and clear in our focus groups that's detailed in our most recent report that Portia just covered, but really want to see more data collection around this population. Making sure to identify or hire a staff member who is dedicated to student-parent work. It's so important that there are champions on your campus for the student group. It's still, even though there's nearly 5 million parenting college students across the country, it's still a very invisible population. And so wanting to make sure that you have designated folks on your staff who are really making sure that this population is getting the supports that they need. And then again, the need to develop those family-friendly campus policies. And what do we mean by that? Things like policies like no kids on campus, for example, make it really difficult for student parents to, for example, meet with a professor for extra help if they don't have childcare lined up. And it really creates an environment where the message is that parenting students aren't welcome. So we're going to go ahead, if we haven't already, dropped the link to that report in the chat for you all, so you have access to that. Another resource we want to share is a publication that we released last year in direct response to the pandemic. It's actually a toolkit for institutions that emphasizes short-term strategies that are immediately applicable and can also be made into long-term supports for student parents. So you can see here a few of the strategies that we outlined in the toolkit are, and although these recommendations were created in response to COVID, many of them are still very relevant for higher ed right now. And so some of those are offering virtual supports for children, making sure that you're thinking not just about how to support student parents during the pandemic and in the long term, but also considering the needs that they might have around their kiddos. Enhancing all support services across the institution. So, I think sometimes we think of student parent work as being siloed in one department, but student parent supports, as Portia said, really need to permeate your institution. The pandemic has required those support services to really be stepped up. So your emergency grants, your counseling around financial aid, your mental health services. So really thinking about all of your support services and the need to really double down on those things to make sure that student parents are able to weather this storm. We also recommend more personal touches, like professors sending a welcome email to students at the beginning of the semester that really communicates their support and acknowledgement of parenting responsibilities. We also even provide actual template language, that family-friendly language that can be included in the course syllabus for professors. So language that can literally copy and paste into their syllabus to communicate to students, again, that you acknowledge there might be parenting responsibilities and that you are supportive of your students' caregiving needs. And we just want to stress that even though that might seem small, those personal touches really do have such immense power in terms of communicating to students that they're welcome on a college campus. So we'll go ahead and drop the link to that toolkit in the chat for you as well. Through our partnerships with other nonprofit organizations, we've also come across additional tools that have proven helpful in strengthening support for student parents. And we're just going to touch on, two quick things here, but there are some really wonderful things that are coming from so many of our partners in this space that you'll want to be aware of. The first is a resource that was released earlier this year from Ascend at the Aspen Institute, focused on the mental health challenges faced by student parents. Mental health supports and the unique challenges of student parents are another under-researched and under-supported necessity for student parents, as 2 out of every 5 student parents in college are experiencing extreme stress. And as you can imagine, this affects their mental health and subsequently their education success. The study includes key findings from their joint survey and research with the JED Foundation, as well as outlines a framework of recommendations for colleges to support student parents' mental health and to improve their graduation rates. And so really wonderful. I also just want to mention that this is one of the few reports that we've seen come out that also calls out the acute challenges that younger parenting students are facing, which is really interesting. So great data in that report there. We also want to highlight another external resource that underscores the race equity impact of focused student parent supports. And this is a joint article between myself and Imaginable Futures, which is a venture partner, Imaginable Futures, which is doing wonderful funding in this space. One of their venture partners, Venice Davis, and I co-wrote this article together, and it really emphasizes the need for stronger investments in student parent supports as a strategy to achieve race equity. And so it's not just speaking to the imperative for this in philanthropy, but also in the higher ed space, really helping schools to understand how this work connects to their DEI strategies. And we're gonna drop these resources in the chat for you as well. The Generation Hope tools and resources can be accessed also via our website at the link below, and we'll drop that in. And we hope that these tools, again, really serve as useful resources in your toolkit of support for student parents. And we're just thrilled and excited to be able to offer them to the field. We also want to hear from you if you're finding these things to be useful. We'd love to hear from you to see how you're using them to implement your student parent supports. Now I'm going to pass it to Reggie, who's going to lead us in our Q&A and then wrap us up. So hopefully you all have been dropping questions in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Nicole and Portia. Before we go into the Q&A, I just want to mention a couple of the publications that are coming down the pike for Generation Hope's national impact work. We have developed our first policy, our policy agenda, which will center the voices of student parents and work alongside them to advocate for change. We will release our policy priorities next week, so be on the lookout for that. And subsequent regional policy agendas will be released annually with specific action items curated by the Generation Hope team and led by student parents. Our hope through the development of this agenda is to continue to shine a spotlight on the challenges faced by student parents in an effort to build a stronger, sustainable system of supports that allow student parents to reach their fullest potential. We will be releasing our Next Gen report in January 2022, which highlights the success of our pilot Next Generation Academy program, which serves the kiddos of our scholars. Our policy agenda and Next Generation Academy report will be made available on our website. So we will also communicate with you to let you know when they're coming out. So be on the lookout for those things. Okay, with that said, as Nicole said earlier, I hope you've been dropping in your questions in the chat. If not, we've opened the chat up now so that you can ask questions, and I will open it up for questions. So let's start with some Q&A. So I recognize that I already see some people already dropped some questions in, and so I'll start here with the first question that we have, and I'm going to direct it to you, Portia. How has the pandemic how's the pandemic impacted student parents?
Sure. So one, as we've mentioned before, student parents have been at the intersection of a lot of groups that are underserved and face a lot of different challenges. And so COVID-19 has served to just make those challenges worse and draw a lot of attention to them. For one, we know that many student parents have low income. And so going through an economic downturn like the pandemic has put a lot of financial strain on them and their families. When you couple that with the higher than average student debt that student parents already have and the quickly approaching end to student loan, the student loan repayment pause, there's a lot of stress that's associated with that as well. A lot of our student parents are also frontline workers, and so they are disproportionately impacted by COVID because they are face to face with COVID on a daily basis. So there are a lot of other things that are also made more stressful because of the pandemic. And another big one just being childcare, having to work more hours if they are frontline workers, / finding new accommodations for childcare when childcare facilities are closed or are opening slowly or don't, or frankly, just don't have the resources that they need in order to operate in a way that continues to be safe for childcare workers and the children that are in them, create insurmountable challenges for student parents. And those are just a few.
Yes, I want to just double click on that. Talking with Caroline Short, our director of programming, she talked about this level of this isolation, what happened as a result of the pandemic. And our report touches a little bit on that as well. And so, yes, thanks so much for that, Portia, talking about those challenges that impact student parents. I'm going to ask you guys to continue to drop your questions in. You can send them directly to Caroline, or you can drop them right here in the chat so that we can get your questions answered. Okay. Oh, I have another one coming in here. This question is for you, Nicole. What can professors do to better support student parents during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think sometimes we think we underestimate the power of individuals in this work and in communicating to student parents that they're welcome in a college community. Something that we really stress to our Family U partners is that you can have buy-in from your leadership and your administration around how important this work is. But if your student-facing staff also does not understand the importance of this work and the importance of communicating to parenting students that they're welcome on a college campus, it can really fall short. And so it's so important that your professors, your student-facing staff are trained on effective student-parent supports, understand their role in advancing this work. And really, when we think about if more professors were putting in their syllabus, this family-friendly language, if more professors were being flexible and accommodating when a student has a childcare emergency, for example, imagine the transformation that would happen across a campus community. And then what we would like to see is across higher ed as a sector and as a field. So definitely just naming the fact that you recognize that some of your students may have caregiving responsibilities, talking about it, but also putting it in your communications to students, making sure that you are flexible. If a student does choose to disclose to you that they are parenting, which we know many students don't because they're concerned about punitive responses. But if a student does share that with you, really being understanding and flexible and wanting to meet them where they are. If they need some more time to get an assignment in, if you have a recording of a class or something that you can share with them so they don't miss out on class content. All of those things are really important. Is flexibility, naming, the fact that some of your students might be parenting, and then meeting them where they are to make sure that they're successful in your class. So all of those things are a really great way to start.
Yes, meeting them where they are. That's a great advice. Okay, we have a question in here. Oh, where will the recording be? Will be again. Okay, I actually have to go to class. So we will make sure that this recording is provided to everyone in an email. So you will receive this. So if you registered, we already have your information, and we'll make sure that you receive this recording. Okay, I'm looking for more of your questions. And again, thank you so much for joining us. All right, I have another one here. When is we talked about Family U. When is the next cohort starting for Family U? I'll give that to you, Portia.
Thank you. So before I announce when the next cohort is starting, I first want to say that this first cohort was limited to the Mid-Atlantic region, and we are really excited to be expanding Family U nationally, but with a focus on the South next year. Really excited to be engaging a new group of institutions and really excited to be more intentionally engaging MSIs and HBCUs in that cohort as well. So we will have an information session for that next cohort on March 30th of next year, and the application will open April 1st. So mark your calendars, share it widely. The Family U cohort application will open on April 1st and will be open nationally.
Yeah, it's great. I'll just add, thanks for that, Portia. We'll make sure you guys, you're on the list, so we'll make sure you receive that information as well. But please mark your calendars. I just want to add to what Portia said regarding our Family U experience here at Generation Hope, that we have made a commitment to support historically Black colleges and universities as well. And so while we'll be supporting in this new cohort 5 institutions nationally, we want to make sure that we identify and work with 2 HBCUs. So if you know an HBCU is very excited about this work and want to begin to do this work and want a thought partner, an accountability partner, and just an all-around partner just to help to do this work, please refer them to us. We look forward to engaging with them and working more on this work. And also you yourself, if you want to be able to provide, more in-depth services to student parents, as Portia said, please apply for that great opportunity. Oh, I have another question coming in. Okay, at my university, we are just beginning to work with the student parent population. What advice do you have? Nicole, I'll kick that one over to you.
Thanks, Reggie. It's a good question. I think one of the things that we encourage people to begin with in doing this work is to start with the data. That data piece is really critical. It's hard to meet the needs of this student group when you really don't know how many of your students are parenting, you're unaware of the challenges that they're up against, and you don't even know if they're making it to the graduation stage and they're actually completing. So we would love to see, as you're beginning this work, that you start with the data collection piece. And we also recognize that that's a difficult piece, that's a difficult lift, and that it engages other departments across the institution that also have to kind of value this effort. They have to buy into the importance of collecting this data. We also, there are some really comprehensive methods for data collection around student parents, and we're not expecting institutions that are just embarking upon this work to implement the most comprehensive methods immediately. We recognize that you may need to start at, efforts like asking parenting status when a student applies to your institution. We know that there are limitations with that method because parenting status can change in 24 hours, right? I could not be a parent when I apply, and then the next day I can become a parent, or I could be providing, support and caregiving to one of my siblings. All of those things can change. But it is a good place to start. And I think once you have, you begin to collect this data and you begin to be able to at least tell the story, a part of the story around what your students who are parenting need, it's easier to then say, now we want to invest in a more robust collection system or be able to take this up a notch. And I think it's really helpful to have data to communicate to other stakeholders within the institution, including your leadership, around this student group, to say, look, here's the data that we've already collected, and this is why we need to now enhance our supports and our services to this population.
Thanks, Nicole. You guys keep dropping in those questions in the chat to Caroline or in the chat at large so that we can see them. Okay. Okay, we have another question that just came in. Nicole mentioned champions for student parents. I believe in the work, but how do I go about getting more champions on my campus for this critical work? Okay, Portia, I'm going to kick it to you.
Sure. And I really love that question. I think that there are a lot of siloed instances where faculty and staff find themselves in that position. And because of that, it can be difficult to find community. But the first thing is, one, going ahead and demonstrating your support for student parents and your individual actions. So if you are faculty, go ahead and include that student parent supportive language in your syllabus. You'd be surprised at what other faculty members may see that and want to copy it because they also feel the same desire, or how quickly word of mouth spreads among the student parents in your class to other student parents who can then serve as self-advocates for the same requests in their classrooms. On the student support services side, go ahead and begin creating documents and resources for your student parents. Similarly, the same thing can happen, but also don't hesitate to infuse student parent supports in your regular processes, because that can garner support across your department and across other departments in serving student parents as well. And then I really want to underscore, because I know we keep talking about data collection a lot, but that's because it's that important, that's central to this work. Once you have the data that demonstrates everything that we are talking about, one, that student parents are incredibly resilient, have higher GPAs, are showing up and doing well, but just need these supports, you'd be surprised at how many people, including leadership, jumps on board. Who does not want to support a group of students who are eager to learn? I haven't met anyone. So once you start to demonstrate that, you start to get people who are in support of the work that you are doing. So it feels siloed, but I promise you there are probably other individuals who are eager to begin supporting students just as you are. They just don't know that there are other people who feel the same way. And the through line for all of that is going to be data that supports everything that you are saying, because it's out there. It really just needs to be collected and presented in a way that promotes action.
All right, thanks. Great information. Thanks for that, Portia. That's great. You guys continue to submit your questions. Continue to, oh, see one that's coming. Nicole, I'm going to give this one to you. Do you have a sense of how many student parents are currently enrolled in college here?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll try to be quick because I know we're wrapping up. So a lot of the data that we do have around how many students who are parenting are enrolled in college is really pre-pandemic. And so we know that pre-pandemic, about 1 in 5 undergraduate students across the country was parenting. We also have really good data pre-pandemic that the Institute for Women's Policy Research put out a couple months back on how many parenting students have had to drop out or stop out of college due to the various systemic barriers that they face. And that's really fascinating data, and that's in the millions. And so we're talking about a pretty significant group of students. What we don't know is how many student parents have had to stop out of college due to the many stressors of the pandemic over the past year and a half. And that's really critical information to have. What we have seen is that that kind of data for other groups that this population overlaps with. So we know that college enrollment has dropped for students of color. We know college enrollment has dropped for first generation college students and for low income students. So what we can kind of glean from that is that it's likely that student parent enrollment has dropped. But again, this speaks to the importance of the data collection because we really want to be able to see what has been the impact of the pandemic. Portia kind of laid out why our students are so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how they have fared. Have they been able to stay enrolled as we come out of this?
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for that. Yes, as you mentioned that we're coming upon our time here, and we want to thank you guys so much for joining us as we embark on our new pathways of support and advocacy for student parents. We hope that you have learned a great deal, or at least it's just reconfirm your commitment to supporting student parents. But please take a moment to visit our website, generationhope.org, and learn a little bit more about us and download these reports. We greatly appreciate you for participating today, and have a great afternoon.